The wedding in Cana and the sign of the water turned to wine is from verses 1 through to 11. So we'll start with that. I'll read through verse by verse. Turning the water to wine is quite well known, isn't it? Most people know that it is the first of Yeshua's miracles or signs. One of the problems we have in our thinking in the Western world is the word miracle sometimes clouds our ability to understand what's going on. So from a Hebraic perspective, for example, this miracle idea would be called ut, which is a miracle, but really actually it's firstly and foremostly a sign that is manifest by God in a supernatural, powerful way, God's power at work within creation. So miracle doesn't quite do it. So I think I'll try and use the language sign, because sign then straight away connects us to the Tanakh, to the books of Moses, to the journey of Israel, and the many miraculous signs that Moses performed. Furthermore, it connects us to the signs that Elijah the prophet performed. And we know that Israel's expectation was that the Mashiach, whoever he might be, would perform signs like those of Moses, would perform signs like those of Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet. And so there was an anticipation for these signs. Water to wine seems like a strange way to kick things off. Seems like kind of a magic trick. We know that's not all it was. Now, there are some who are desperate for it not to have been turned into wine. They want it to be grape juice because they're of the opinion that wine is the devil's elixir. Unfortunately, that's not the case with regard to the language that we're using. Both the Hebrew and Greek words for wine, it's crazy, I know, but they actually mean wine. I know, it's hard to take. Furthermore, those who will agree that it's wine but don't want people drinking will say, yes, but Jesus or Yeshua didn't drink it, he just turned it. Unfortunately, he did drink wine elsewhere, so again, you're just going to have to wrestle with the fact that this is wine Yeshua turned it into and not grape juice, and that's where it goes beyond a party trick. Because whilst you can change the colour of something, you cannot ferment it, age it, and what's more, have it taste like the superior or the best wine in a matter of moments. That's an impossibility. So that's where the party trick idea goes out the window. And you might recall the first miracle of Moses, the first public miracle or sign of Moses, was turning the Nile River into blood. Now he did that, and then Pharaoh's magicians did something similar. See, what they did is they did the party trick version, where the concentrate's inside the vessel, and they made it look like they had done what Moses did, the difference being that the miracle that God performed through Moses via Aaron actually not only turned the river red, but the tributaries as well. In fact, the whole land was infected by this blood. So we're going to begin tonight's reading keeping in mind that Moses is connected to this first miracle of Yeshua. The text clearly shows us that not everybody at the wedding knew what Yeshua had done. Let's start with verse 1. And in the third day, there was a marriage festival beginning in Cana of Galilee. And the mother of the Yeshua was in that place. Okay, so I've got a map of Cana. So you can see on the map of Cana where Nazareth is. Nazareth being the place that Yeshua spent most of his middle years. Okay, so he's born in Bethlehem, did a little bit of a stint to Egypt, came back. He spent most of his middle years in Nazareth. And then much of his ministry years was spent in Capharnaum, in Capernaum, where he did a lot of his ministering, and in the whole region of the Galilee, or the Canary. We've got to think about the fact that Yeshua's mother and Yeshua himself and others in their close family were coming from Nazareth to Cana, and that was about a 2-hour walk. So that just kind of gives you an understanding of how close this all was for him. We notice that it says, and it was the third day. And some people would say, well, that means it was the third day from when the last events of Yochanan had happened, of John 1 had happened, okay? But others, and I think they're right, would say that no, the reference to the third day is a Hebraic reference. So we have day 1, Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi. It's an important day, the third day of creation. Third day of creation. It's important. This is why the Jewish author of the Jewish gospel to the Jewish people references it. Otherwise, why reference it? There's a wedding in Cana during the week. Why say the third day? So actually, I believe it's an indication pointing to creation. And you guys aware of what happened on the third day? Well, on the third day of creation, what I can tell you is grapevines were created. Grapevines were created amongst other things. So it was when the vegetation came. It's actually the day when we go from the earth and the water being added to. Because we go through the first couple of days, the water drawn together, the creating of the expanse, the forming of the land. But we come to the third day and the land is given vegetation. You guys are thinking, this has nothing to do with anything, he's a complete nut job. Just wait, we're not done yet. Okay? Put a pin in it, put it over here, the third day. To get married on this day was considered a blessing for the Jewish people. It's a special day to get married on. The name of the marriage in Hebrew, chatunah, there's something special in that too. Chatunah is a feminine word, but it's a merging of two words really. It's like the chatan, the bridegroom, meets the kala, the bride, and we have this unity, chatunah, marriage. And so what happens is the bride takes on the character or the essence of the bridegroom. Chatan, chatunah. So that teaches us something about our relationship to the Mashiach and to God himself. Just one word. It's a simple word, but it's very important. Okay, this happened in Cana in the Galilee. Cana, it means reeds. And I think that's significant, and you might think I'm going overboard. But what's about to happen is there's about to be a connection made with the first really public miracle after the swallowing of the snakes. The first, or the inauguration, the signs, the public signs of Moses, was done amongst the reeds next to the Nile River. This is done in a town called Reeds. That's what Cana means. Okay? In the circle of the Galil, the Canary. We notice that it says the mother. Why doesn't it name Miriam or Mary, the mother of Yeshua? So I guess you guys, some of you do or don't know, Mary wasn't the name of the mother of Yeshua. Her name was Miriam. Mary is the anglicized delusion that came later, just like the name James replacing Yaakov in the book of Yaakov. But what if you'd always known that the name of Yeshua's mother was Miriam? Well, wouldn't you associate her with someone else from the Tanakh? Like maybe Moshe's sister? Because you're Jewish, you know the stories, but Yochanan doesn't name her. He says the mother. Do you know that Yochanan, the author of this gospel, doesn't name the mother of Yeshua even once in the entire gospel? He names other Miriams, yes, and they're called Mary, but that's not their name. Their names are Miriam. He names them, but he doesn't name the mother of Yeshua. Who else doesn't he name? Himself. The two people that are never named in the Gospel of Yochanan are Yochanan and the mother of Yeshua, because there's an intimate connection between the two of them. Yochanan's the disciple that Yeshua loved. This is a way of saying his best friend. Doesn't mean he loved the other disciples less. It's okay to have a best friend. Miriam was a woman who, from when he was very young, looked upon him And the scripture says she saw these things and treasured them, kept them, locked them in her inner being. You see, there's an intimate connection between both Miriam and Yeshua and Yohanan and Yeshua. That means that when he writes his gospel, he feels no need to name either himself or her, because he relates so intimately with her, and he knows his audience, who are firstly and foremostly Jews, know both names and need not have them told to them. Just wanted to read you this scripture. I don't know if you should recall it. When Yeshua, this is at Yeshua's crucifixion on the tree. When Yeshua saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Precious woman, here is your son." And to the disciple, that's Yohanan, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. So you see that intimacy and why he doesn't name her. Isn't that neat? The Yeshua. Why does the text say the Yeshua? First century Israel. If you yelled out Joshua in a busy town, half the town's young men would come running to you. Joshua was a common name in first century Israel. It's a common name today amongst Jewish people. Yehoshua. So he makes sure you know which Yeshua he's talking about, because there were more than one Yeshua at the wedding. So he's saying, you know the one I mean, the Yeshua, the Messiah. That's who I'm talking about. Different wedding traditions for those from Galilee, those from beyond the Yarden, and those from Judea. All three different groups had different wedding traditions. That'll have to be another study, because I got a page of notes on that too, but I'll skip it, don't worry. Verse 2, and both Yeshua and his Talmidim, his students, his followers, his religious pupils, were called by name to the marriage festival. And what the Greek's telling us is that this was not just a general invitation, but this was an intimate invitation. We note that Yeshua's mother seems to be very involved. And that is most likely because members of their wider family were getting married. So the most likely scenario is this was actually a family wedding that Yeshua was going to, and his newly found disciples were coming with him. Not all 12, mind you, but the ones that were with him thus far. Yeshua was there, right? Okay. And then we have Andrew, John, right? He's the unnamed one. Simon Peter, Philip, and Nathaniel. That's who was with him. Obviously, Yeshua wasn't one of his own disciples. Who else came? His brothers. Did you know Yeshua had brothers? Well, now you do. The scripture tells us about his brother Yaakov, his brother Yosef, named for their father, his brother Yehuda, as in the tribe, and his brother Shimon. The early rabbinical teaching says this: they do not bless the blessing of the bridegrooms unless there are 10 principal free Jewish men in attendance. One of the number may be the groom. So actually it was Jewish tradition that they needed a minimum of 10 free Jewish men to be present in order for the Bachot, the 7 blessings of the wedding, to be said. And that's exactly what we've got in the text. Why would Yohanan put this in here if he's writing to Gentiles? And verse 3, and when they were behind in the supply of wine, the mother of the Yeshua said to him, they have no wine. You know, this whole wine thing was a problem. They had run out of wine. Do you know what wine symbolizes in biblical Judaism, first century Judaism, today even? Blessing. Blessing. They've run out of blessing. This is not good. It shames the whole family. If the visitors to the guests at the wedding had found out there was no more wine, there would have been disgrace on the family for failing to provide the correct hospitality. So it was a big problem. There's no wine. You're sure there's no wine? She was obviously involved in the organization, or else why was she telling him this? And when they were behind in the supply of wine, the mother of the Yeshua said to him, they have no wine. Did you notice that Mary is a servant at this banquet? The Yeshua said to her, "What have I to do with your doings, precious woman?" It's not what your Bible says. Your Bible says something like this: "Woman, what have I got to do with you?" The Greek word gune, or in Hebrew we would have there's a few different words. Isha. Isha also means wife. But the Greek word, like the Hebrew word, it has an intimate connection to it. And it actually should be better translated precious woman or dear woman. And in fact, the same Greek word was used in the text that I read you from when Yeshua was on the tree. Imagine if we translated that the same way. Okay, so the traditional reading is, "Woman, what have I got to do with you?" Imagine that, transfer that now, exact same Greek word, Yeshua's on the cross. "Woman, your son." It's ridiculous. Yeshua's one who honours women. He says to his mother, whom he honours, respects and obeys, according to the Torah, "Precious woman, this is kind of your job, isn't it? Why are you asking me, Mum, to do this stuff?" And he goes on to say, "My hour, my time is not yet arrived." And if we read it in Hebrew, the translation would be, "With me what is yet to be is not come." But guys, he's not angry. He's helping her to understand something greater, perhaps. But does it occur to you that if God knows the end from the beginning, that Yeshua was always planning to do this sign? You see, there's this idea out there, which is entirely false, that says that somehow Yeshua conceded to his mother's carnal request, and so he did a miracle. And sadly, I've heard this taught from the pulpit like that. But I'm telling you that he always intended to do this sign. Shucks, this has been in the works from way back at the Nile River, when Moshe first turned the Nile red. It's been in the works from before creation. So, it's not how we think. He doesn't concede to her. Look what follows. His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Whatever he says to you, do it. Does that sound like a woman who's mad at her son for contesting her request? No, she submits to him. You know, a carnal mother might have said, "What? You're not going to do it? I'm your mama. 14 hours I spent pushing you out. And you can't do this little thing for me. Oi, oi, oi." No, Miriam's a servant. Miriam turns from Yeshua and she says to the servants, "Do whatever he says." There's some motherly advice we could all take notice of. Yeah? Here, I'll give it to you. Do whatever Yeshua says. Do whatever Yeshua says. She was a righteous woman. Might interest you to know that she was probably only about 44 years old at this time. So she was still a young woman. Still a young woman. A woman who treasured the things of her son in her heart. A precious woman. John 2:6. "And there were set in that place 6 stone water vessels, according to the purification rituals of the Judeans, each capable of containing 75 to 115 litres. Do you remember what I talked about the third day? Day 3 of creation. Stone water vessels. The Torah says that a clay vessel defiled has to be smashed, but it doesn't mention stone. And for this reason, in the first century in Israel, there was a massive production of stone vessels for ritual use, because they could be rinsed and reused for holy things. Whereas a clay vessel that was defiled had to be smashed. It couldn't be reused. So there was this burgeoning industry. And guys, they've uncovered an archaeological site of a stone quarry only miles from Nazareth. Only miles from Nazareth, off of one of the main highways. And in this quarry, they've found pieces of partially manufactured stone vessels and other broken pieces of the stone that this quarry has been bringing out. And here's the thing. The Greek word tekion, which we usually translate carpenter, can actually mean carpenter, stonemason, labourer, or just a worker in general. There's a quarry only miles, only kilometres from Nazareth, where stone vessels are made. Yeshua, the son of a stonemason. Yeshua, the apprentice of a stonemason, because that's what the Greek word can mean. Stone vessels at a wedding 2 hours hike away that actually Yeshua might have quite literally made. So these stone vessels could well have been stone vessels that he made in the quarry close to Nazareth. It's conjecture, but it's quite possible. It fits with the rest of the narrative. I'll tell you why. Why doesn't the author just say there were stone vessels there for ritual washing? See, a Jew never puts a number in a story unless it means something. A Gentile might have just gone, there were stone vessels, some ritual that they do with them. A Jew puts a number for a reason. Can you think of why the number 6 might be important? We're going to do questions at the end. I know it felt like that was a rhetorical question. So I'm going to tell you, and then we're going to have questions at the end. You can tell me, no, that can't be right, and you're completely off the wall here tonight. Well, there were 6 days of creation. And in the beginning, there were essentially 2 elements. There was earth or stone, and there was water. See, because the creator of the universe sent his word. What does chapter 1 say? In the beginning was the word, the creative word of God, in the beginning. Now here he is beginning his miracles with 6 days of creation in front of him, with the stone and the water of the beginning of creation in front of him, and now these empty vessels. So the creator of the universe, manifest as God with us, Yeshua, is going to begin his signs at the very beginning of creation. It says that these stone vessels were used for ritual washing. And I can tell you what they did. It's called netilat yadayim. It's a ritual washing of the hands. It's done before you eat the Shabbos meal or before a sacred meal of some kind. And they would have used a bowl of about this much water each. And they would have said a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shekedishanu v'mitzvoto v'tivanu al netilat yadayim. All blessing comes from you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us by your right actions and has instructed us in the washing of hands. They would have done what I just did, and we still do it today. This tells us something because these stone jars were empty. We know that because in the next verses, Yeshua tells them to fill them up. Now, what we've got here, we heard the measurements of the stone jars, but what we've got here, if we do some math, is we can actually find out approximately how many people were at the wedding, because they would have used the water from the jars, right? Each one capable of 75 to 115 litres. Each person would have used about 300 to 500 mils of water, like I have, to do the ritual washing. That's the observant. And then if we make a sum of all 6, and I'm just going to average it out, about 100 litres per stone vessel, we've got about 600 litres, yeah? So then we divide it by 3 to 500 mils. We've got 1,200 religious Jews, observant Jews at that wedding, and perhaps some others who didn't practice netilat yadayim. 1,200. So you can see why I say she says the Yeshua, because there was easily 20 other Joshuas in the crowd. Verse 7. The Yeshua said to them, fill entirely the water jars with water. And they filled them entirely up to the brim. Guys, in Genesis 1, we read about the drawing together of the waters. The Hebrew word is mikveh. This is the Hebrew word for the immersion pool, what we call baptism. Mikveh, same word. At the beginning of creation, the drawing together of the waters is called mikveh. Here's Yeshua with the 6 days of creation. And he's putting new water into these empty vessels. Not the old water, the water he's bringing. Ma'im chaim. Remember the woman at the well, the Samaritan? Give me the water that you have. I want that water. Ma'im chaim, the living waters. Beginning of creation, the mikvot. What did we find out in John chapter 1? That Yochanan had come to immerse. But there's one coming with a better immersion. In what? A mikveh. Creation. Beginning and fall. Beginning again and renewal. So Yeshua was inaugurating the signs of his ministry. This sign is not just a magic trick. This sign has great symbolic meaning. And he always intended it to. And he said to them, draw out now. This happened straight away. They filled it up to the brim, and while it was still brimming, they drew it out. It was wine, guys. An instantaneous process, and a fine wine that would have had to have aged for a minimum of 6 months to taste as good as it did. And here it was straight away. Draw it out now and carry it to, if I read it in Hebrew, it says El Rav. El Rav. Carry it to the Great One. It's a wedding banquet. The name or the title of the master of the banquet is the Great One. And the one who we later find out is the bridegroom of all who believe is at this wedding banquet and presenting his sign to the Great One, the master of the banquet. The very first sign he's making is pointing to the end of all things, the wedding supper of the Lamb. And who's performing the sign? The Lamb of God, who takes away the offense of the world. We just read it 1 chapter ago. I got to tell you, the Greek word for this master of the banquet is pretty cool too. So in Hebrew, Alav, right, the Great One. But the Greek word, it's a compound word. It's made up of a whole lot of Greek words. My pronunciation might not be very good, but I think it's architriklinos. And like I said, it's all Greek to me, but I can read a book. So here is the word. I don't know if that's the right pronunciation. It's made up of 3 words. I think it's archi, but it could be Archie. I used to like those comics when I was younger. Archi, which means what? Does anyone know? Overarching, right? It actually can be associated with the beginning of things. Overarching. The next word, tria, means 3. And then the final word that makes up this word, klino, means to recline or to rest. And actually it was a word that talked about 3 couches that were joined together as a reclining area at a banquet, and it became a noun for the master of the banquet. And this master of the banquet happens to be 3 things. The overarching ruler of all things, 3, Father, Son, and Spirit, and the eternal rest for all who receive his Son. All in this one Greek word. Our love, the Great One. And Yeshua is presenting the water now turned to wine to the Great One. Ready? Verse 9. When the Master, the Great One, our love of the feast, had tasted the water, it had become wine. And he had not seen the place it had come from. But the servants who drew the water knew. Thus the Great One of the feast, called the bridegroom, in Hebrew, Chatan. So not everyone at the wedding feast knew, right? How would they? The servants knew Yeshua had done this. They had actually literally participated in it and saw it happen. Even the master of the banquet didn't know where it had come from. The bridegroom didn't know where it had come from. Miriam probably knew. Miriam probably had whispered it to Yeshua's brothers, because Miriam would have been like, come on, you need to get behind your brother. You know, he's the Mashiach. Come on, work it out. Work it out. Well, they had a rough journey together. It wasn't until after Yeshua was resurrected that his brothers began to believe in him and became some of the early church fathers. So probably the only people that knew, certainly at this point, were Yeshua's brothers, his disciples, his 5 disciples, his mum and the servants. 1,200 guests at this feast. They were the only ones that knew. Isn't there a drash in that? Doesn't that teach us something? Verse 10, and he said to him, that's the bridegroom, every man or every human being first sets out the excellent, precious, surpassingly good wine. And no, I'm sorry, it's not grape juice, it's wine. How do we know this? How do we know it? Even if we say the Greek word means grape juice. We know it because of this. And when people have become drunk. I don't know when your last friend got drunk on grape juice, but I would say that's kind of an issue of mental illness rather than alcohol. Okay, so we know it's wine. And when people have become drunk, then that which is worse. It makes practical sense. You give everyone the good wine first, they can taste it, savour it. Oh, hint of cassius, tobacco, and barky cherry. And then they move on. They've had too much to drink. This guy's not going to know if it's good or bad. Give him the purple death. If you're a West Aucklander, you know what I'm talking about. But no, you didn't do this. Listen to the words. I think it's beautiful. But you have taken care. You have taken a care, attended to matters carefully, reserved, kept the excellent, precious, surpassingly good wine until this moment. And yes, there's a metaphor, an allegory there for the father, the great one of the banquet, and the bridegroom, who we will come to know as the Mashiach. There's an allegory there for sure. But there's also this, guys. If we think about it carefully, within those 1,200 odd people, how many of them could appreciate the wine? Because you see, they had run out of wine. And that is the author telling us that a lot of people at that wedding were drinking irresponsibly and were drunk. Some were not. Which of the two got to receive and appreciate the fine wine? The ones who weren't drunk. And this is also speaking to the gospel. Because only those who had drunk responsibly could receive and enjoy the fine wine that Yeshua had created. And I say created because he created it from nothing. He had water and stone and made wine. What did God do at the beginning of creation? He bara. He created from nothing. All other creating is asa, to create from something. But Yeshua created wine when he had no wine. He created wine without grapes or grape juice or yeast or fermentation or anything. So he created wine from nothing, just like the creator of the universe created at the beginning. And here he is offering this symbol. What's it a symbol of? His time has not yet come. What time was he speaking of? His death and resurrection. So his first miracle was to point to his time, which is why he said to his mother, but my time hasn't come. However, this sign I'm going to do today will tell you what is going to happen at the culmination of my ministry. That I will give my life, and that the ritual water that could only ever cleanse the outside of the body will be transformed into blood that can cleanse a man eternally. That is what this miracle is about. That is the importance of it, because he was pointing to that great sign that was to come. And so when those guys at that banquet who drank responsibly savoured that fine wine, they were a picture of what it means to be sober of mind, ready to assess the truth and to receive the fine wine of Yeshua's blood, and with it, eternal redemption and cleansing. Not the cleansing of water on the outside of the body, but the cleansing of the spirit, the soul, benefesh, belev, ruach, of the entire being. Verse 11, and this is the end of this section. This beginning or origin, this first of the signs, okay, and the same word ake, which was the beginning, the origin, and the word describing the master of the banquet, the origin, the overarching, this beginning of signs, Yeshua did in Cana, in reeds of the Kinneret, of the circuit, and manifested, made known, made visible his glory, splendor, brightness, his opinion, his judgment, his view. All these are meanings for the words doxa and kivodo. And his disciples, religious students, his talmidim, believed, had faith, trusted, were persuaded, accepted the truth in him. You know, this was the beginning of 7 signs in the book of John that all connect Yeshua to creation. All 7 of these signs show Yeshua as the master over creation, starting with this sign of creating from nothing, the 6 days of creation, the stone, the water. They began with this. What do you think they culminated with? Yeshua raising Lazarus from the dead. That was the 7th. Master over creation, ultimately, master over that which has chased humanity down since the beginning. Master over death. This was the 7th one. It was also the first of a total of 37 signs that Yeshua does, and those are collated from all of the Gospels, right? Add to that his miraculous birth, the sign of his crucifixion and the sign of his resurrection, and you have 40 signs, which connects him again to Moses, the beginning of Moshe's ministry, 40 being the fullness of God's purpose and the beginning of new purpose. All of it has significant Hebraic meaning. So we've got the creator of the universe as word manifest among his own people, Israel, the Jewish people. He's in Cana, the place of reeds, to do a miracle that is very similar to the first public sign of Moses, with imagery from the creation of the world, where he creates from nothing, and pointing toward his ultimate sacrifice and resurrection, turning the water into the wine that's a symbol of his blood shed for many. All of this is connected to this miracle, not just a party trick, eh? I've titled the next part, Yeshua makes a whip and stomps on some tables. Again, the master of the banquet and the bridegroom, probably Yeshua's relatives on his mother's side, or even his father's side. Notice his father isn't mentioned. His father must have passed away prior to this. He must have passed away somewhere between when Yeshua was 12 years old and this time. So Yeshua was fatherless at this time. If you're without a father at this time, remember that Yeshua also knows what it's like to be without a father, and that he is able to identify with you.
But then you talked about different traditions in different parts of the different regions, like they're up in the north. Was there a reason they adopted that custom up there?
That's a great question. So there were different customs. However, netilat yadayim, the hand washing, was probably common to all the different sects because it's a purification ritual. But the reason that I think the writer is specifically saying the ritual washing of the Yehudim or the Judeans is that this story is about to link to the Passover of the Judeans, where Yeshua is about to go up in Yerushalayim. And what he's saying is that there were Judeans coming from Jerusalem to this wedding. And so the wedding organizers had set up ritual washing in their custom and tradition to welcome them. This was a big deal because you've then got different faith practice, different faith observance, but the same God and the same ethnic Jewish people really connecting together, which tells us it's possible that the marriage was, contrary to tradition of the time, a union of someone from the Judeans and someone from the Galileans. So what you've got is actually a union between two groups that would otherwise have conflicting ritual practice. So what Errol's referring to is something we call Sheva Bachot, which are the 7 blessings that are said, and each of the things that Errol itemized are part of the 7 blessings that are prayed over the couple at the Jewish wedding. Sheva Bachot. Yeah.
Like he could have chose a circumcision Sabbath, Bar Mitzvah day, all sorts of other days, but it's really, in what Rob read about, bridegroom and the wedding, this is amazing to take that event as the key event to start a public ministry. Yeah.
I, for one, am glad he didn't choose a circumcision. Could you imagine a drunk moil? Oops, wrong one. That's John 2:12-25. After this, he, that's Yeshua, went down to Capharnaum. That actually means village of comfort, by the way. Kafar means village, Nahum, comfort, and Menachem, comforter, is one of the traditional names for the Messiah in Judaism. Village of comfort. Interesting. So he went down there, he and his mother and his brothers, or his brethren, and his disciples, his religious students. And they continued there only for a few days. And I've got a picture of the map, which I'm sure that will already be up there. But you can see the journey down to Capharnaum, and then I've got a picture of the synagogue at Capharnaum, which I took on one of the times that I was there. And then there's another picture of the entryway, and this synagogue is 4th century Byzantine, but it's built on top and in the same dimensions as the 1st century synagogue underneath it, where Yeshua spent a lot of his time. So I just thought it'd be nice for you guys to see some pictures, and if probably in the first picture, I don't know if you can see or not, but around the sides of this synagogue, men and women sat together. Okay, women weren't put separate behind or up behind like they are in the Orthodox shul today. Men and women sat together in these early synagogues. It wasn't until the destruction of the temple that women were put behind a barrier or upstairs behind a barrier in synagogues. So in Yeshua's time, men and women sat together in the synagogue. Yam Kinneret, the Galilee, right next to Capharnaum there. So Yeshua, this is where he walked down to. This was about a 7.5 hour walk. Okay, it's about 38 kilometers from Cana down to Capharnaum, where they only spent a short time. They didn't linger long. Verse 13, and the holy convocation of the Passover of the Judeans. Okay, this brings up Eliyahu's question again. The Passover of the Judeans was at hand. And Yeshua made Aliyah. Yeshua made Aliyah. He went up to Yerushalayim. And then there's a slide there of the distance between Capharnaum and Yerushalayim, keeping in mind that Yeshua, born in Bethlehem, short stint to Egypt, living the center part of his life in Nazareth, but the majority of his ministry life in Capharnaum, in the village of comfort, and him being Menachem, the comforter, the King Messiah. Okay, none of this happens by accident. And then Yeshua, along with his family, most likely all of them, because it was an Aliyah festival. Pesach is one of the Regalim. The Regalim are the Aliyot, the going up festivals. Passover, okay, Shavuot and Sukkot. They're the going up festivals. Every man in Israel was to attend them according to the Torah. Pesach, or the Passover of the Judeans. Why? Well, Yochanan's kind of very clear about the different sects and religious observances amongst the first century Jewish people, even to the point of making clarification with regard to the Samaritans. And Yeshua, speaking with the Samaritan woman at the well, says to her, "You worship what you do not know." She says to him, "We know you say we should worship on that mountain," that's Mount Zion, "but we worship on this mountain, that's Mount Gerizim." Where do you think the Samaritans had their Passover sacrifice? And in fact, they still do today. So the writer says the Passover of the Judeans, which is done the right way in Yerushalayim, where the Torah commands it to be done. Any Passover sacrificed anywhere else in the land brought a curse on the people, because the Torah had said that when you come into the land, it will be where God has placed his name that you will make this sacrifice. On the altar in Jerusalem, and it became known that Passover sacrifice became known as the Hagigah. The festival day was that sacrifice, the Hagigah. So Yeshua is going to the right mountain to celebrate Pesach, the Passover of the Judeans. And yes, he is Yehudi, so he's headed to the right place. Verse 14. So Yeshua had made Aliyah to Yerushalayim and came upon, found, discovered, not outside, listen carefully, discovered in the temple, salesmen, barterers that sold oxen and sheep and doves, and the money brokers sitting in fixed abode. Understand the weight of what I've just said? This was not being done in the court of the Gentiles. Both the Greek and the Hebrew text make it very clear it was being done in the temple precinct itself. So this wasn't being done out in the court of the Gentiles. This was being done just prior to the court of the priests, in the court of Jewish men. Look where it's being done. You can understand why he was PO'd. Fixed abode. The Greek indicates that they hadn't just set up collapsible tables, they had actually set up semi-permanently. Some of them had probably constructed little booths. They were well set up. There was nothing temporary about what they were doing. It was established. Verse 15, and when he had prepared, constructed, when he had fashioned a scourge or a whip out of individual cords, he drove, cast them all out of the temple, and the sheep and the oxen, and poured out, sent flying, spilled abroad the changes of small coins, both the small coins and the tables. And guys, most versions say were overturned, but the Greek word can mean destroyed. Yeshua stayed furious for a good half an hour to an hour while he carefully fashioned a scourge. Seriously, he didn't just go, "Oh, I don't like this." He saw it. He was steaming angry. He sat. He methodically made a scourge. And then he went for kakta on those guys. That's a Yiddish word that means postal crazy, all over those guys. He destroyed the tables. He didn't just flip them over. He destroyed them. He stomped them out. They weren't just flipped over, they were in pieces. He spent almost an hour making a whip. I got another picture of the kind of whip that was used at that time, and a picture next to it of the kind of damage it does. Gentle Jesus, meek and mild. Some of those guys at those tables caught it on the neck, or on the back, or in the leg. Maybe some of them caught it in the eye. This was a violent act. The love of God is violent. He starts with us, with the Jews. The gospel's first for the Jews, so is the judgment. And so is the Olam Haba. But he starts with us. He cleans house with us, the Jews. And he said to those who sold, bartered over doves, Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise, trade, an emporium. Mate, I think of some of the emporiums around town, the $2 shops. Let's put it into modern vernacular. Do not make the holy Temple Mount in Jerusalem a $2 shop. That's how disgusting this is. And his disciples remembered that it was written, the zeal for your house has eaten me up, consumed me. His disciples remembered. These guys were the Am Haaretz. They were the West Aucklanders of first century Israel. Okay, the common people, the unstudied people, the people the rabbis looked down on. Here's the thing. They knew the Tanakh. They knew the Tanakh. They knew the Tehillim. They knew the Psalms of David. They knew them off by heart. These are the common people, not the educated students of the rabbis. And they remembered, what does it say? And they remembered the quote from Psalms, which, zeal for my house consumes me. What does it say in that psalm? It says, I am a foreigner to my own family, a stranger to my own mother's children. This was literally true. His own brothers did not believe in him at this point. Why? Why was he a stranger? Why was he a foreigner? For zeal for your house consumed me. He made himself a foreigner when he stomped on those tables. He made himself a foreigner to his own people when he cleared out the temple, because they had fixed abodes. They had settled in. And he was coming to wreak havoc against what they were doing. And the insults of those who insult you fall on me. That's the part of the psalm that isn't clear in the text of John. But when a psalm is quoted, all of the psalm is intended, and the reality is that Yeshua was about to get insults for what he was doing. And the insults of those who insult you, the insults of those who set up booths to sell product in your holy place, fall on me. Then the Judeans, the Jewish leaders, religious leaders in Jerusalem, answered and said to him, what sign, what miracle, what sign will you show exposed to our eyes, seeing that you do these things? Yeshua answered them and said, destroy, loose, unfasten, unbandage this temple, and in 3 days I will arouse, raise it up. Then the Judeans said, the temple has been constructed over a period of 46 years, and will you arouse, raise it up in 3 days? 3 days? Remember how this chapter started? But he had spoken of the temple of his body. And you know what? The same Greek word used for temple in both instances refers not to the temple precinct, but to the holy place and the Holy of Holies, the Mishkan. So he's relating the Mishkan that was with us in the desert to the temple that is there, the proper temple, and his own body. Verse 22, when therefore he was aroused or risen from the dead, his disciples, his Talmudim, remembered that he had said this to them, and they believed, trusted, were confident in the writing and the word which Yeshua had spoken. The writing is the Ketuvim. See, it's using the Hebrew word for a specific part of the Tanakh. Tanakh is the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. The disciples remembered the Ketuvim, where the Psalms are located. Again, it's a very Jewish way of saying things. Now, when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover on the festival day, many believed, trusted, were confident in his name when they saw the signs which he did. But Yeshua did not commit and trust himself to them, upon which he knew all, and did not need the testimony of man or humanity, for he knew what was in among humanity, the man, Adamah. Here's the thing about what happened here, because this is a pretty powerful sign, but here's the thing. This same account is mentioned in the other Gospels, but they quote different scriptures. What does he say? My Father's house is meant to be a house of prayer for all nations, and you've made it a den of thieves. A completely different scripture. And you know what else? Those other accounts happened at the very end of his ministry. If you look at the chronology of those Gospels, the destroying of those tables in those Gospels happens 3 years after the event we've just read about. That means they went back to doing the same wicked thing, and he came back again. So this instance is one of 2 times Yeshua smashed up the tables. Look, the thing is that the Torah required a temple tax be paid when Jewish men made aliyah for the regalim, for the going up festivals. Yes, half a shekel. But what they were doing was they were taking this guy's money who had come from Rome, and they were charging him, 10 times more than what the shekel was actually worth, and making profit from these guys who had come up to do what was right according to the Torah and were being abused by these people who had power in Jerusalem. So you can understand why Yeshua was furious, because righteous people were making aliyah and unrighteous people were ripping them off in the holy place. And all of them Yehudim. Jews do not do this to Jews. It's wrong. The many who believed in his name were those outside of his religious circle and his family. Okay? They genuinely believed in his name. They genuinely believed he was the Messiah. Okay? But they, like his disciples, were still holding on to this idea that he would defeat the Roman Empire and rule physically as King of Israel. So he didn't entrust himself to that agenda, because that is for a yet future time when he will come again as the warrior King Messiah. So he didn't want to entrust himself to them, because they would stop him from giving his life and doing the work of redemption for all humanity. That's what's happening there. Their belief was valuable and worthwhile. It was just they didn't have the full picture yet. It's not lip service. They truly believed.
You made reference, like in Jesus' time, that men and women sat together in the synagogue?
Yes, I did. Do you want me to explain that more? So the temple was separated into courts. And so there was the court of the Gentiles, which actually was not part of the temple precinct proper, but it was outside of that on the big retaining wall that Herod built on the Temple Mount. Then there was the temple proper. There was the court of the women, where the women of Israel could go. Gentile women couldn't go there, only Jewish women. Then there was the court of the men. Jewish women couldn't go there, only Jewish men could go there. Okay, that was called the court of Israel. And then there was the court of the priests, which was beyond that, and that was part of what in the times of the desert would have been the outer wall of what people call the tabernacle, which is better called the Mishkan, the outer wall. And those priests went in there. But, there are pictures of Israelis or Jewish men sacrificing their animals inside there. That didn't happen. The men of Israel were not allowed into there. Only Levites were allowed into there. They made their sacrifices at the opening if they required to do it themselves, and then gave it over to the priest. Or if it was a sacrifice that needed to be made by the priest would take the animal and sacrifice it. But the men of Israel, who were not Levites, were not allowed in there. So that's the court of the priests. Then there's the holy place, where the Levites that were on duty for that time would go in. And then there was the Holy of Holies for the high priest. So that separation meant that there was always this idea of an order in which things were done. Women are here, men are here, priests are here, and so on. When the temple was destroyed, and our rabbis who didn't believe in Yeshua, because lots of them did, just keeping in mind, so thousands of people believed in Yeshua at this Passover festival in the first year of his 3-year ministry. Thousands of Jews believed in him already. That's what the text says. Then later on, 3,000 in one day. Thousands upon thousands of Jews accepted Yeshua when he came. Do not buy into the lie that only a few Jews accepted him and the rest rejected him. That's not the case. Those who did not, once the temple was destroyed, they had no temple, they had no blood for atonement. They had to reinvent Judaism. And that they went to Yavne in the southwest, and they began to redevelop and change the way Judaism was practiced, so that today we have rabbinical Judaism that is based on the teachings of these rabbis rather than on a focus on sacrifice and blood covering. Okay? There are some aspects of Judaism that still focus on that, but generally no. When they did that, they started to arrange the synagogue like the temple used to be. And so they had the court of the women. The women were in the back or upstairs behind a wall. And then they had the court of the men, and that was where all the Israelite men worshipped. And then they had the Torah Ark, where the Torah scroll is kept, and that's the Holy of Holies. So they set up the synagogue to emulate the temple that was no longer there. And that's how that came to pass. Notice what's happened. So we've got men and women sitting together in Yeshua's time, worshipping together in the synagogue. And then those who reject Yeshua end up bringing back this patriarchal oppression and putting women out the back and taking us backwards. Isn't that sad? But here today we worship like the Jews of the first century worshipped, men and women together. Just like Yeshua intended for us to worship. Good question, thank you. What you're bringing out is great because it shows just how angry and just how destructive he had to be. This is how important holiness is to God. So we cannot any longer have this picture of Yeshua that only allows for gentle kindness. Yes, he is gentle and kind, but if we refuse to accept that he is also fierce, he is violent, he is after the holiness of God, if we refuse to accept that, then we put ourselves in danger because God is holy. God is holy. Yes, gentle, but he's holy. This is what this story is teaching. There's no one here who's an anti-Semite. You guys all love the Jewish people. You love Israel. You understand the paradigm. You know that this is a perspective and that God loves the Gentiles just as much as he loves the Jews. It's a matter of order, not a matter of hierarchy. So let's focus on that, but let's remember God is holy. All I'm saying is I'm glad Yeshua can make a whip and bust stuff up. I'm glad that the Messiah who protects me is fierce for me, that he's fierce for the holiness of God. That's the Messiah I serve, and I'm okay with him not being a pacifist. You know, you see someone getting beaten up and you do nothing, you're not a pacifist, you're an idiot. You're not a follower of Yeshua, you're a sinner. Amen. So I'm glad Yeshua's not a pacifist. Yeah, he's coming again as the warrior king Messiah. Baruch Hashem, let's pray. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam.